Hi everyone, this is Marianne and welcome to a series on my channel called 5-Minute Book Talk, in which I take roughly 5 minutes to talk about a book that I have read while I flip through the book. And today I will be talking about the novel The Wind in the Willows, written by Kenneth Grahame. I have the Kindle version right here with illustrations by Scott McCowan. Now, this is a classic children's book, first published in 1908 in the United Kingdom, and this has been quite popular worldwide over the years, including in my country, the Philippines. But for some reason, I have never read it before now. I've lived with books and around books ever since I was a child, and I have read my fair share of children's books, but this was not one of them. But it is never too late to read any book for the very first time, in my opinion, so I went ahead and read this, and of course it was so much fun to read, even as an adult. Of course, reading it for the very first time as an adult gave me a different lens through which to process the book, which I'm sure is very different from how I would have processed it had I first read it as a child. This book is actually a novel which has a little bit of fantasy in it because it tells about the adventures of small animals living in their natural habitat in the forest, and the animals behave like adult human beings. They interact and make decisions and philosophize like adult human beings, and they have lifestyles as if they were adult human beings. The main characters are Mole, Rat, Mr. Toad, who was very obnoxious, and also Badger. There were other peripheral characters like the otter and his family, the squirrels and the rabbits, and the weasels and the stoats, and so on. But the majority of the plot revolved around Mole, Rat, Badger, and Toad. Mole is this little timid, anxious guy who has an attachment to his home underground because he's a mole. Rat is this chill, laid-back character. He is a water rat who had his home by the river, and he would sometimes sail his boat down the river and go on short adventures away from his home from time to time. Mr. Toad is the one that I said earlier is very obnoxious, and he had a grand house that is different from the natural habitat of the other characters. It was an actual house that he called Toad Hall, and he had several cars that he would drive, and he wore swanky clothes as if he were a human being, and he would host grand dinners in Toad Hall for his friends, where he also displayed his talent in elocution and public speaking. He was very, very showy, very full of himself, and he always wanted to be the center of attention. He was also very flighty and had delusions of grandeur, and I do think that he loved his friends in his own way, but I think that because he was delusional, his decisions showed no regard for the ordeal that he would put his friends through. His friends would be the ones to help him get out of the difficult situations that he puts himself in. It was quite funny, the scrapes that he gets into, and like I said, his friends would bail him out of it, except that one time when he was thrown into prison for stealing someone else's vehicle, and he, Toad, managed to escape prison because someone he just met had helped him. But to hear him talk about his great escape from prison, he makes it sound like it was because of his sheer brilliance alone. He does show some humility sometimes, but it is always short-lived, even though it's sincere. This kind of children's book, that is actually a novel, was obviously written for older children, those who can follow a more complicated plot and a larger number of characters. The illustrations in this book were also not really necessary to the book. I mean, we could follow the story without seeing any of the illustrations, and in the various editions of this book over the decades, no illustrations were really the same because they were not organic to the story. They were artwork that enhanced the reader's enjoyment of the story to help bring them closer to imagining the characters and the scenes. But those are the illustrator's creative depiction of the book and not an actual requirement of the author, Kenneth Grahame. Because I read this book now, when I am old, I noticed how non-childlike the writing is compared with other books written for children, because it did not explain or lecture, which is what many children's books do. It was whimsical but not preachy. The point the book makes is clearly for children because it aims to teach children the value of friendship, loyalty, honesty, home, being responsible for yourself and your friends, listening to good advice, and so on. But the book doesn't explain or state those specifically. It just assumes that whichever child is reading this book at any age would figure it out all by themselves. There is a level of maturity that this book assumes of its child readers. Reading this book for the very first time in my old age, did I enjoy it? Yes, like I said, of course I did. I could really empathize with the characters, which is a credit to the author, not to me. So if you haven't read this book yet, I highly recommend that you do. And if you already have read this in childhood, please read it again and see if it resonates with you differently.